Sir, you need to stop resisting and get on the ground. Resisting? I'm standing still with my hands visible. I am a sitting federal judge.
The cell phone cameras were already recording, at least a dozen of them, angled from storefronts, car windows, and the hands of shocked pedestrians lining the busy downtown street. And Officer Floyd M. Loomis had absolutely no idea that the man he was about to force to the ground in handcuffs had spent the last 22 years sitting on the federal bench, presiding over the exact types of cases he was about to create: police misconduct, civil rights violations, and Fourth Amendment abuses. The man standing next to the burgundy sedan with grocery bags in his trunk wasn't shouting. He wasn't running. He wasn't resisting. He was Judge William A. Trowbridge, and he had ruled on qualified immunity defenses. He had sent corrupt officers to federal prison. He had written legal precedents that police departments across 6 states were required to follow. And now he was about to become the plaintiff in a federal lawsuit that would cost the city millions of dollars, trigger a Department of Justice investigation, and end multiple careers. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you believe that no badge should be a license to humiliate someone based on the color of their skin, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more jaw-dropping. You don't want to miss what happens next. William A. Trowbridge was not someone who expected special treatment. At 64 years old, he had been a federal judge for over 2 decades. He had handled capital murder cases, white-collar crime prosecutions, and landmark civil rights litigation. He was known for his sharp legal mind, his unshakable composure under pressure, and his unwavering commitment to constitutional law. But on this ordinary Saturday afternoon, loading organic vegetables and a rotisserie chicken into his car, none of that would matter. The call came into the dispatch center at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. The voice on the line belonged to Martin Chen, owner of Chen's Fine Gifts, a boutique that sold overpriced candles and decorative bowls to the kind of clientele who shopped in the 5th Street district. "Hi, yes, I want to report a suspicious person," Chen said, his tone carrying that particular mixture of concern and certainty that dispatchers hear 100 times a day. "There's a black man, maybe late 50s, early 60s, walking up and down the street looking into car windows. He's wearing a nice suit, gray I think, but he's been out here for like 10 minutes, just lurking." The dispatcher, a woman named Sandra Voss who had been taking calls for 6 years, typed as she spoke. "Is he trying to open any vehicles? Has he damaged any property?" "Well, no, not that I've seen, but he keeps stopping at different cars and looking in. It just doesn't feel right, you know? This is a nice area. We don't usually see, he looks out of place." Voss paused for half a second. She should have asked the obvious question. What exactly made this person suspicious beyond being black in a nice area? But she didn't. The script in her head had already been written by 1,000 similar calls. By implicit biases she didn't even recognize she was following. Is he still in the area? Yeah, he's across the street now. Still doing the same thing. Just stopped at a red sedan, looking in the windows. What Martin Chen didn't mention, because he hadn't bothered to actually observe what the man was doing, was that William A. Trowbridge wasn't looking into car windows in any meaningful sense. He was checking parking meters. He had parked his own burgundy sedan 3 blocks away in a metered spot and had paid for 2 hours. But the hardware store had been more crowded than expected, and he'd spent 40 minutes just waiting for a clerk to cut him duplicate keys. Now, walking back to his car with a stop at the grocery store planned, he was doing what thousands of responsible drivers do every day, checking to make sure he had enough time left on his meter before making another stop. But to Martin Chen, watching from his shop window, it looked suspicious. Not because of what Trowbridge was doing, but because of who was doing it. A black man in an inexpensive suit didn't fit Chen's internal narrative of who belonged in this shopping district on a weekend afternoon. And that discrepancy, that cognitive dissonance between upscale neighborhood and black man, translated in his mind to threat. "Okay, sir, we're sending an officer to check it out," Voss said, already typing the call into the system. "Can you stay on the line? Actually, I've got customers." But he's definitely still out there. The call went into the system with a designation that would seal Trowbridge's fate. Possible vehicle prowler. Black male, 50s to 60s, gray suit, well-dressed. 5th and Merchant Street area. Caller reports subject looking into multiple parked vehicles. Not one person in that chain, not Chen, not Voss, not the supervisor who scanned the call log, stopped to ask the critical question. What crime is being committed? The answer was none. But the call had been made. The system had been activated, and Officer Floyd M. Loomis, who had his own history of seeing threats where none existed, was already turning his cruiser toward 5th Street. William A. Trowbridge had never wanted to be a judge, at least not at first. What he'd wanted, growing up in South Philadelphia in the 1960s, was to be a teacher. But his high school civics teacher, Mr. Feldman, had pulled him aside one afternoon during his senior year and said something that changed everything. "William, you argue like a lawyer. You should think about law school." The idea seemed absurd. His father worked double shifts at a textile factory. His mother cleaned houses in the suburbs. Yale Law School wasn't for people like him. Except it was, because in 1979, riding a full scholarship in sheer determination, William Trowbridge walked through those ivy-covered gates and refused to let anyone make him feel like he didn't belong. He graduated near the top of his class in 1982, turned down six-figure offers from white-shoe law firms, and took a job as a public defender making $23,000 a year. For 8 years, he represented the poor, the forgotten, the constitutionally entitled to counsel who couldn't afford it. He won cases that should have been unwinnable. He challenged illegal searches. He fought prosecutorial misconduct. He memorized every Supreme Court decision on Fourth Amendment rights and wielded them like weapons in preliminary hearings. Then the ACLU came calling. For the next 14 years, Trowbridge became one of the nation's leading civil rights attorneys. He argued before the Second Circuit. He challenged police departments from Boston to Baltimore. He won a landmark case establishing that racial profiling in traffic stops violated the Equal Protection Clause. He wrote articles for law journals with titles like Qualified Immunity and the Erosion of Accountability, and Terry Stops in Practice, When Reasonable Suspicion Becomes Reasonable Racism. In 2003, President Obama, then a senator who had read Trowbridge's work, added his name to a list of potential federal judicial nominees. In 2009, after Obama's inauguration, Trowbridge received the call. The confirmation hearings were brutal. Conservative senators grilled him about his ACLU work, suggested he was soft on crime, questioned whether he could be impartial. He answered every question with the same measured precision he would later bring to the bench. "I don't serve victims or defendants, senators. I serve the Constitution." He was confirmed 62-38, and for the next 22 years, Judge William A. Trowbridge presided over the Northern District with a reputation for brilliance and fairness that even his critics couldn't deny. He sentenced murderers to life without parole. He also overturned convictions based on coerced confessions. He ruled against police departments that destroyed evidence. He granted qualified immunity when officers acted in good faith, and he stripped it away when they didn't. His most famous decision came in 2017. Patterson versus Metro Police Department, a case involving an officer who had tased an unarmed black teenager during a traffic stop. Trowbridge's 47-page opinion became required reading in police academies across 6 states. He wrote, "A badge is not a license to substitute fear for facts or bias for reasonable suspicion. When an officer's stated justification for force rests on nothing more than a citizen's skin color and geographic location, we are not dealing with law enforcement. We are dealing with state-sanctioned oppression." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew him. The man who had spent 2 decades teaching police officers the limits of their authority, who had written the very legal standards they were supposed to follow, was now standing in a parking lot being treated like a criminal by an officer who had either never read those standards or simply didn't care. Trowbridge could feel his heart rate elevating, but he forced his breathing to remain steady. 22 years on the bench had taught him how to remain calm under pressure, and right now, he needed every ounce of that discipline. Officer Loomis stood 3 feet away, hand hovering near his taser, his body language radiating aggression that had nothing to do with actual threat assessment and everything to do with control. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet very slowly," Trowbridge said, enunciating each word clearly. "My identification and federal credentials are inside. May I retrieve them?" "I told you to keep your hands visible," Loomis snapped. "You don't get to decide what happens here." "I do. Constitutional violation number 1, Trowbridge thought, his legal mind cataloging everything even as his body remained perfectly still. Detention without reasonable articulable suspicion. A crowd was forming now. A woman in a business suit had stopped on the sidewalk, her phone already raised and recording. 2 teenage boys on skateboards had paused across the street. An elderly man walking his dog stood frozen, watching with growing concern. "Officer Loomis, I'm trying to cooperate with you," Trowbridge said. "But under Terry versus Ohio, you need reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime to detain me. Being in a public parking lot is not." "Are you a lawyer?" Loomis interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what this is? You think you can lawyer your way out of this?" "I'm a federal judge, officer. And yes, I know the law." Loomis's jaw clenched. The audience was making him defensive, and Trowbridge recognized the dangerous psychology at play. Officers who escalated in front of witnesses weren't backing down. They were doubling down to save face. Constitutional violation number 2. Use of threatened force without legal justification. Officer, please listen to me, Trowbridge said, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I'm telling you, as someone who presides over police misconduct cases, that you are currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights. There is no reasonable suspicion here. The Supreme Court established in Brown v. City of Oneonta that you cannot detain someone based solely on racial characteristics. A 911 call describing a black man is not. Stop resisting, Loomis shouted, though Trowbridge hadn't moved. I'm not resisting. I'm standing still with my hands visible, exactly as you. You're arguing with me. That's resisting. Last chance. On the ground or I tase you. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, he's not doing anything. Leave him alone. Another voice. Get his badge number. Are you recording this? Trowbridge felt the horrible weight of the choice before him. He could cite chapter and verse of constitutional law. He could explain that Loomis was violating clearly established precedent. He could invoke his authority as a federal judge. But none of it mattered because Loomis had already decided who Trowbridge was. Not a judge, not a legal expert, not even a human being entitled to dignity. Just another black man who needed to be put in his place. Officer Loomis, I am formally notifying you that this detention is unlawful. I am complying with your orders under protest, and I am preserving all of my constitutional rights. Do you understand what I'm saying? What I understand, Loomis said, pulling his taser from its holster, is that you're about 5 seconds from being tased for failure to comply. Get on the ground. Trowbridge's mind raced through his options. Every instinct honed over decades in courtrooms told him to continue asserting his rights. But every lived experience as a black man in America told him that this officer, with his hand on a weapon and his ego on the line, was seconds away from violence. I'm going to kneel down, Trowbridge said slowly. I'm doing this under protest and duress, and I want it noted for the record that I have repeatedly identified myself as a federal judge and requested that you verify my credentials. Shut up and get down, Loomis barked. As Trowbridge lowered himself to one knee, his mind continued its legal inventory. Constitutional violation number 3, compelled submission without probable cause. Violation number 4, failure to provide justification for detention when requested. The list was growing with each passing second, and every single violation was being captured on multiple cameras. A silver sedan pulled up and stopped. The driver, a white woman in her 40s, rolled down her window. Officer, what's going on? That man said he's a judge. Did you check his ID? Ma'am, step back from the situation, Loomis said without taking his eyes off Trowbridge. But he's not doing anything. He's just. Ma'am, if you don't leave this area, I'll cite you for interfering with an investigation. Investigation, Trowbridge thought bitterly. An investigation of what? The crime of loading groceries while black? Officer Loomis. He tried again, his voice strained now as he knelt on the cold asphalt with both hands raised. Under Terry, you need articulable facts. You can't just. Hands behind your back. I'm citing legal precedent, officer. The Supreme Court has consistently held. Your badge doesn't make you right, Loomis shouted, and the irony of the statement would have been laughable if the situation weren't so dangerous. You think because you claim to be some fancy judge that the law doesn't apply to you? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the law applies to you. You cannot detain me without reasonable suspicion, and you cannot arrest me without probable cause. What crime do you believe I've committed? Suspicious behavior. Failure to comply. Resisting. I've complied with every order. I'm on my knees with my hands up right now. The crowd was growing larger, and their voices were getting louder. This is bullshit, someone yelled. Let him go! Another voice. Racist cop. We see you. Loomis's face flushed red. The attention was feeding his aggression, not tempering it. He grabbed his radio and called for backup, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Unit 447 requesting backup at 5th and Merchant. Subject is being combative and non-compliant. I'm on my knees, Trowbridge said, his voice rising for the first time. How am I being combative? Because you won't shut up. Loomis moved behind him. Hands behind your back. Now. Trowbridge felt the cold metal of handcuffs bite into his wrists. Constitutional violation number 5. Arrest without probable cause. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to breathe. This was really happening. After everything he'd accomplished, after all the cases he'd presided over, after all the times he'd ruled on these exact circumstances from the bench, he was now living them. Officer, those cuffs are too tight. You're cutting off my circulation. They're fine. Stop complaining. Violation number 6. Excessive force. The crowd's anger was palpable now. A man in a running outfit was shouting into his phone. Yes, I'm witnessing a black man being arrested for literally nothing. Fifth and Merchant, get down here. A young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, stepped closer with her phone extended. Sir, what's your name? We're recording everything. William A. Trowbridge, he said clearly, his legal training kicking in. Federal judge for the Northern District. My credentials are in my wallet, in my inside jacket pocket. Someone please document this. Note the time. Approximately 3:15 p.m. on Saturday. He's lying, Loomis muttered, pulling Trowbridge to his feet with unnecessary force. They always claim to be somebody important. Then check his wallet, the young woman shouted. Why won't you just check his ID? Because I don't take orders from civilians, Loomis shot back. Back up, or you're next. The woman didn't back up. Neither did the others. They formed a loose semicircle, phones raised, bearing witness to an injustice that would soon be seen by millions. The handcuffs dug into Trowbridge's wrists as Loomis yanked him upward from his kneeling position. The judge stumbled slightly, his equilibrium thrown off by having his hands restrained behind him, and in that moment of imbalance, one of the grocery bags that had been sitting in his trunk tumbled out onto the asphalt. Oranges rolled across the pavement. A carton of eggs cracked open, yolk spreading in a bright yellow pool. Watch it, Loomis barked, as if Trowbridge had intentionally created the mess. I can't watch anything, officer. You have me in handcuffs. A white woman in yoga pants and a fleece jacket pushed through the growing crowd, her face flushed with anger. This is insane. He told you he's a judge. Are you seriously arresting him for putting groceries in his own car? Ma'am, final warning. Step back. No, this is wrong, and you know it. She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Everyone keep recording. Make sure you get his badge number. This is racial profiling and we're all witnessing it. Loomis's grip on Trowbridge's arm tightened painfully. Constitutional violation number 7, retaliatory use of force in response to protected speech. The judge's legal mind continued its catalog, even as his body absorbed the abuse. 2 more police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Officers emerged, and for a brief moment, Trowbridge felt a spark of hope. Surely someone with more sense, more training, more humanity would see what was happening and intervene. Surely someone would check his credentials and end this nightmare. But the arriving officers read the scene according to the script they'd been trained to follow. Fellow officer in confrontation with suspect. Backup requested. Crowd getting hostile. They didn't see a federal judge being illegally detained. They saw what Loomis had primed them to see. What have we got? Asked a shorter officer with sergeant stripes. Suspicious person call. Subjects being uncooperative, claiming to be a federal judge. Loomis's tone made it clear he thought the claim was absurd. I'm not claiming anything, Trowbridge said, fighting to keep his voice steady. I am a federal judge. My name is William A. Trowbridge. I was appointed to the federal bench in 2003. My credentials are in my wallet, if one of you would simply verify. Sir, you need to calm down, the sergeant said. I am calm. I'm also being falsely arrested. This is an unlawful detention under the 4th Amendment, and every officer here is now potentially liable for violation of my civil rights under Section 1983. The sergeant exchanged a glance with Loomis. The legal language gave him pause, but not enough. Sir, if you're really a federal judge, this will all get sorted out at the station. Right now, we need you to cooperate. I have cooperated. I'm in handcuffs for loading groceries into my own vehicle. The crowd erupted. Let him go. Check his ID. This is bullshit. A teenager climbed onto a concrete planter to get a better camera angle. An older black man stood with tears in his eyes, shaking his head slowly, having seen this story play out too many times before. And then the white woman in yoga pants did something that would later be cited in the federal lawsuit. She walked directly up to Loomis, positioned herself in front of his body camera, and spoke clearly into it. Officer, my name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm an attorney. I witnessed this entire encounter from the beginning. This man was loading groceries. He identified himself as a federal judge. He has done nothing illegal. What you are doing right now is a civil rights violation, and I will testify to that fact in court. Do you understand me? Loomis's face went crimson. Get out of my way or you're under arrest too. On what charge? I'm standing. For a moment, the scene hung in perfect tension. The crowd, the cameras, the spilled groceries, the handcuffed judge, the furious attorney. The officers who were slowly beginning to realize they might be on the wrong side of this encounter. Then Loomis made his final fatal decision. Load him up, he told the sergeant. We'll sort it out downtown. As they guided Trowbridge toward the patrol car, his expensive suit jacket stretching awkwardly over his restrained arms, someone in the crowd shouted what everyone was thinking. He told you he's a judge! What are you doing? What are you doing? But no one answered. They simply put Judge William A. Trowbridge into the back of a police cruiser and drove away, leaving behind a crowd of witnesses, a dozen cell phone videos, and a scattered pile of groceries that would soon become the most expensive spilled oranges in the city's history. The 5th Precinct holding area reeked of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Judge William Trowbridge sat handcuffed on a metal bench, wrists aching after an hour of restricted circulation. Officer Loomis had deposited him there without explanation, disappearing into the station's maze of hallways. At the booking desk, Officer J. Martinez processed paperwork, occasionally glancing at Trowbridge with uncertain eyes. After 45 minutes, Martinez approached with a clipboard. Name? William Arthur Trowbridge. Occupation? Federal Judge, Northern District. Martinez's pen stopped completely. He looked up, meeting Trowbridge's eyes. Sir? I've been trying to tell Officer Loomis this for 90 minutes. My credentials are in my wallet, which your colleague confiscated. If you would retrieve it and verify. Wait here. Martinez walked quickly toward the back offices, his body language suddenly tense. Through the glass partition, Trowbridge watched Martinez approach a supervisor's desk. The captain, a woman with captain's bars, stood up abruptly, her hand going to her forehead in disbelief. She pulled out Trowbridge's federal court ID, examined it. Then her face went pale. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking as she made urgent calls. Martinez returned, panic in his eyes. Sir, I'm removing those cuffs. Captain Rivera wants to speak with you. The cuffs came off, revealing deep red marks. Constitutional violation number 8. Prolonged unnecessary restraint causing injury. Captain Denise Rivera appeared, recognition of legal disaster written across her face. Judge Trowbridge, I apologize for this misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Captain. This was a violation of my constitutional rights. I want my property returned. I want documentation of every officer involved. And I want to leave this building. Meanwhile, Floyd Loomis sat with Lieutenant Freeman, still confident he'd done everything right, until Freeman delivered the news. Floyd, he's a federal judge. The color drained from Loomis's face. The first video hit Twitter at 3:47 p.m. Attorney Rebecca Walsh uploaded it with a caption that would be retweeted 300,000 times. Federal judge arrested for loading groceries while black. Officer refused to check credentials. This is why we need police reform. By 6 p.m., 800,000 views. By midnight, 5 million. By Sunday morning, every major news network. The second video, capturing the handcuffs, Trowbridge clearly stating his name and title, Loomis's dismissals, reached 15 million views by Monday. Judge Trowbridge spent Sunday meeting with attorneys. He chose Brennan and Associates, a Washington, D.C. firm with $47 million in police misconduct settlements. Monday morning, his legal team filed a 47-page federal lawsuit. The complaint was surgical. It named Officer Floyd Loomis individually, the city, Captain Rivera, and backup officers. The appendix documented Loomis's complete disciplinary history, 23 formal complaints in 8 years, 19 involving black civilians. Every single one dismissed, or resulting in minimal discipline. The lawsuit went deeper. Traffic stop data showed Loomis stopped black drivers at 4.7 times the rate of white drivers. Statistical analysis revealed a pattern of racial discrimination the department had failed to address, despite clear warning signs. The demand, $4.7 million in damages, policy reforms, and a federal consent decree placing the entire police department under Department of Justice oversight. By Tuesday, the DOJ announced a pattern and practice investigation. Inside the 5th Precinct, the mood was funereal. Officers were placed on administrative leave. Loomis was met by Internal Affairs and spent 6 hours answering questions about his entire career. His union rep, Don Kowalski, watched the case collapse. Floyd, they've got you on video dismissing a federal judge's credentials. They've got witnesses, your disciplinary history, and statistical data. I've defended good officers who made mistakes. But this, you arrested a federal judge for loading groceries because you couldn't conceive of a black man in that neighborhood being anything other than a criminal. By Wednesday, Police Chief Raymond Morris held a press conference. Officer Floyd Loomis has been terminated from the police department. Settlement negotiations began in late February. The city's legal team arrived prepared to negotiate, to find middle ground. Instead, they found Judge Trowbridge at the head of a conference table with a PowerPoint presentation titled Constitutional Violations, a Comprehensive Analysis. Lead City Attorney Margaret Chen had prosecuted before Judge Trowbridge. She'd always found him fair. But the man across from her wasn't a dispassionate jurist. This was a plaintiff with every advantage. Before we discuss settlement figures, Trowbridge began, I want to make something clear. This isn't just about money. This is about systemic change. He clicked through slides showing Loomis's complaint history, traffic stop racial disparities, use of force statistics, and internal affairs reports dismissing complaints. Here's what happens if this goes to trial. Trowbridge continued. You'll face a plaintiff who has presided over police misconduct cases for 2 decades. You'll argue qualified immunity to a jury that's seen the videos. You'll defend an officer whose complaint history reads like a case study in racial bias, under national media scrutiny. He slid a document across the table. Chen read and felt blood drain from her face. $4.7 million in damages. Federal consent decree with independent oversight for 5 years. Mandatory bias training. Body cameras with footage automatically uploaded to independent servers. Civilian review board, with actual disciplinary authority. And termination of every supervisor who dismissed complaints against Loomis. These demands would fundamentally restructure how we police this city, Chen protested. Which is cheaper than what a jury will award when I testify about kneeling on asphalt while handcuffed, being called a liar, and spending an hour in a holding cell. Chen knew the calculus. A trial would be disaster. We need to discuss this with our client. You have 1 week. 3 days later, Chief Morris resigned. 2 days after that, Captain Rivera was reassigned. On March 15th, the city announced settlement, exactly what Trowbridge demanded. The check arrived Tuesday morning in April, $4.7 million. Trowbridge held it briefly, then called his attorney. Sarah, I want to donate $2 million. Split it between the ACLU's Criminal Justice Reform Project, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and local grassroots organizations. The money needs to go where it can create systemic change. By May, the consent decree was in place. DOJ appointed a monitor. Every officer completed 40 hours of bias training. Body cameras rolled out to all patrol officers. The Civilian Review Board gained real power, authority to investigate, access personnel files, and recommend discipline up to termination. The reforms cost $11.3 million the first year. Conservative talk radio erupted about woke activists bankrupting cities. But data told a different story. 6 months in, use of force incidents dropped 34%, racial profiling complaints decreased 41%, and officer morale improved. In June, Judge Trowbridge returned to his courtroom. At 9 a.m., he ascended to the bench. The packed courtroom included reporters, activists, and citizens bearing witness. Before we proceed, he began, I want to make a brief statement. On February 13th, I was illegally detained while loading groceries. I was targeted because of my race. I had every advantage. I knew the law, had resources, credentials, authority. None of it mattered. So think about what happens to those without my advantages. He paused. The settlement has been partially donated to organizations fighting for systemic change. But money and policies aren't enough. We need a fundamental shift in how we think about policing, justice, and who deserves the presumption of innocence. He picked up his gavel. This court remains committed to equal protection under the law, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality. The gavel echoed. Justice isn't just about courtrooms. It's about parking lots, street corners, moments when power meets vulnerability. The reforms would cost $15 million over 5 years. But the real price of prejudice, trust broken, dignity stolen, equality betrayed, that cost was incalculable.